today we're going to be sharing with you some of the most important things you need to think about when having a baby in Portugal.
So the first thing to mention is, if you're not already pregnant, then make sure you're in Portugal 12 months before birth. Because if you're registered here with all the paperwork done, so like you're fully resident here 12 months prior to giving birth, Portugal has a very rare advantage. As the only country in EU, you can give your future child Portuguese citizenship straight away on birth.
For me, it was a very anxious time. It's the first time that I have ever been pregnant or had a baby in Portugal, so there were many things that I needed to think about. One of the things that I would say is to feel confident in challenging things that don't quite make sense. So one example of those things is that early on I was recommended a series of blood tests to do in early pregnancy, and the whole suite of tests would have cost in excess of €1,000 despite having private medical insurance. So one thing I will say, if something doesn't sound right, challenge it, because actually when I did challenge it, what we realized is that a number of those blood tests that had been recommended were not compulsory, and actually I was able to get the same amount of data that we required to check the health of the pregnancy by doing a third of the tests that were recommended originally.
Also to add, the whole testing could have been included in our medical insurance if just the doctor had written a recommendation letter that it was necessary.
Yes.
But because he hadn't written a recommendation letter that it was actually necessary, but just had written out the test and told us to do it, then we had to pay for the full thing. So it's just a small thing to bear in mind, that you need to double check and ask the doctor, is this actually necessary and what is it for?
Yes.
To understand the purpose of what you're going through with, and not just follow advice blindly.
Absolutely. On that point you make of understanding, definitely would recommend that if you don't speak fluent Portuguese, that you get a translator.
Yeah.
Because despite feeling confidence in some areas of understanding in Portuguese, as we both do now, I would be terrified at the notion of an emergency situation and not being able to communicate my thoughts or feelings or ask questions. So that's definitely one thing that I would recommend.
Yeah, you simply have to buddy up with someone you feel very comfortable with.
Yeah.
That can help you translate those situations where it's a little bit too complicated for you to understand, or if you're thinking that something might be misunderstood in the process.
Definitely. And on that, one other point that I would say is that if this is either your first child, or you're used to giving birth in a certain way, or you have a very sort of specific birth plan in mind, definitely check out if those services are available at all in Portugal.
Yeah.
So for example, having a doula, which is quite common in the US, less common in the UK, for example. They do exist here, but it's on a private basis. So you would need, especially if you need an English-speaking doula, then you would need to find someone, meet up with them, make sure you feel confident, you can trust them, that sort of thing. But they are very rare. The other thing that I would say, really important birth, is that home birth is not very common here in Portugal. So if you have the desire to have a home birth, then it's something that you should discuss with your doctor really early on in your pregnancy. It's not impossible, but it's not supported as well as it is in other countries.
And one thing to bear in mind on that is that the wait time on ambulances in Portugal can be very long, either if you're in rush hour, for example in the city, or if you're living in one of the more remote parts of Portugal. It can take a long time before the ambulance even gets to you, never mind returning into the hospital, which can create some level of health risk that you just need to be aware of.
There are some brilliant Facebook groups out there for expectant mums. So definitely sign up to those. I'll leave the main one in the description box. There is also a website called Birth Advisor, and I found this invaluable because it has a list of all the private hospitals in Portugal where you can give birth and reviews, so you can get a sense of what type of birth experiences people have had in various hospitals across Portugal. Now, a word of warning, a lot of the feedback is not for the faint-hearted, so I would advise you sort of viewer discretion advised at this point, because there are some horror stories. There are also some beautiful stories, but like with every country, there are some things that don't go to plan. But it gives you a sense of varying birth experiences and people's stories, and you also have to put it in perspective and remember that with every hospital there will be good experiences, there will also be horror stories, so you really have to put it in perspective in your mind and be prepared for that.
And then the other thing to add into that is when you are writing a review about such things, it's usually the negative things that come up.
Yeah.
So you really have to like dig the good out of the bad and just get an overview of each hospital.
Yeah.
When you are like us, not living in like the main city, the closest 5 hospitals to us don't have a maternity department. So it's also relatively important that you know the nearest private hospital, the nearest public hospital that does have a maternity department, so you're not driving in the wrong direction on the due date.
Yeah.
So also, just in case of emergencies, like just know what maternity hospitals that are close to you. Also, if you're traveling close to your due date across Portugal, look at what maternity hospital is near your closest Airbnb or hotel or whatever you're staying at, just so you are one step ahead when you are giving birth in a new country like many people are here in Portugal.
It was really great for us because we'd signed up to private health insurance. But one word of caution here, whilst we had medical insurance, we were ill-advised up front because we were told that our birth would be covered by the insurer. Way down the line, when I was in my 9th month of pregnancy, my insurer actually told me that they don't cover the birth, and there was no recourse for them because despite complaining, we still couldn't get that decision overturned. So what it meant is ultimately we ended up paying full price for a birth. As it happened, everything went well and there were no complications and it was a natural birth. However, had there have been extra complications, it could have ended up being very costly for us. So definitely, and we had it in writing, that's also one thing to say. We got it in writing from the insurer themselves that they were absolutely 100% going to cover the birth. And then later on, they decided they weren't going to. So that's definitely something to bear in mind.
If you're going to give birth in a public hospital, and if you're going to have your care throughout the pregnancy through a public hospital, we're not expert on this because we haven't had it, but we have a little bit of knowledge which we're going to share now. So first of all, you need to go to your GP, your local family doctor.
At the Centro da Saúde.
Yeah, and you probably don't have that if you're newly arrival, but so then you have to go to Centro da Saúde, which is your local health center. And everything goes through there, so you can't try to bypass it and go to anywhere else because everything starts there. So you need to make sure you have an SNS number. If you've been, SNS number is a health number. If you've been in Portugal for less than 5 years, your SNS number is temporary and most likely not covering your birth in a public hospital. So you can be asked to be paying for the birth in a public hospital under some circumstances. So you need to go to the Centro da Saúde and ask them for a temporary permanent SNS number, as they called it, where for the duration of the birth and some period afterwards, convert the SNS number to be permanent and to cover it, because in most circumstances they will have to cover it. If you're an EU citizen or if you come under Brexit or in a bunch of different scenarios, they will cover it, but you need that paperwork, otherwise you're not, the hospital won't take you serious. So Centro da Saúde is also the way into the hospitals for your needs under your pregnancy. So you can be seen for different tests and different doctors.
Prenatal care.
Prenatal care. So you basically have to start there, and they have to refer you into the hospital you want, or that they're recommending. There can be more hospitals that you are allowed to go into, and it can also be that there might be a closer hospital that do the prenatal care, but don't do the birth. So you also just need to understand how that works for your postcode, essentially. But as a general rule, everybody in your region, all hospitals in your region, you can use to give birth. So that's roughly your options when you're looking for the forum recommendations. Then you can look at your entire region and find the one you're most comfortable with.
Don't be afraid to challenge. If something doesn't sound right, if something doesn't feel right, it's absolutely within your right to challenge it. Be confident in doing so, because this is your body, your pregnancy, and you know yourself the best. And there are plenty of situations during my pregnancy and afterwards where we felt that we needed to challenge what was being recommended. One such thing is that my particular obstetrician had a personal event. Her son happened to be getting married in my 37th week of pregnancy. So she suggested to me that I might want to be induced so that I can have my birthing experience with her. And this, for us, was an absolute no-no, and actually would have been dangerous for us to do so. Now, she obviously, as a medical professional, thought it would be safe to do so. I'm sure she wouldn't make any decisions that would be medically negligent. However, it's not something that we felt comfortable with. Bearing in mind it is my third pregnancy and my third birth, I feel very comfortable in challenging things that don't seem quite right. However, had this have been my first pregnancy, had I have not had the support that I have, then perhaps it's something that I may not have challenged so much. So definitely anything that seems out of the ordinary, definitely challenge. What ended up happening is that I got reassigned to a new doctor, and I ended up giving birth with a different doctor. But I made it very clear that that wasn't my wishes.
And at least when you are using a private hospital, at any point you can just say thank you, walk out of the obstetrician's room, go down to reception and book another obstetrician.
Yeah.
So, and then get a second opinion on it, because and that's what we did, just to get a plan that you're comfortable with, because when you're pregnant, when you're giving birth, it's such a big thing that you must be comfortable. And if you are uncomfortable, you have to find a way to get comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's at least a power you have when you are within the private hospitals here, that you have the full option to just check that out and make sure that you're happy with the direction things are going in.
One thing that really helped me and gave me a sense of comfort was by having a birth plan that I'd written in Portuguese, and I'd bullet pointed all of the things that I absolutely do not want and that I would want. So I made it very clear in my birth plan that episiotomy wasn't an option unless there was an emergency. I also made it very clear that I didn't want to use birthing instruments, again, unless it was absolutely vital, and that I wanted a natural birth where possible. And it was absolutely honoured for me. My birth plan was honoured, and it was read by at least 3 doctors before I gave birth. So I was delighted that I had it. I had several copies, made sure it was in Portuguese, and that I could also say all of the elements of my birth plan in Portuguese comfortably, so that there could be no misunderstanding over what I wanted.
On that note, when you are getting close to giving birth, you need to prepare your documents. So have a folder with all your different documents, your residence documents, your SNS document, your certificate, your residence certificate, your passport, and of course your insurance if you're going in the private, and of course means to pay with. Because when the birth, for example, starts naturally and you have minutes to prepare, then you need to know exactly where you're going. You need to have transport available, and just have everything thought out so you can execute all of that in minutes. Just so you have much more comfort once the process starts, and basically remove all uncertainty.
That's one thing I will say. That's a good point about being organised there. One thing that happened to us is that with my other 2 births, I had to be induced. But by some miracle and manifestation, I managed to break my waters naturally. And so this was totally unexpected. I had my induction booked in the diary, but as it happened, my waters broke naturally the day before my scheduled induction was due to happen. And so we were a little bit unprepared for this. So we had 2 options. We could either go into a private hospital, which was CUF Discabertas in Lisbon, or we had a public option, which were also we'd visited beforehand, and by all intents and purposes, they were supposed to be ready to receive us. However, when we got to the public hospital, things actually took a turn, and it was a really poor experience.
Yeah, so we couldn't get seen, and the time was passing so fast, and the birth was like in process.
I was in active labour.
Active labour, yeah. So we had to give up on that and get back out in the car and drive back to the private hospital we'd used before, and go straight into their A&E, and they were ready to receive us straight away.
One question that I'm often asked is, do I feel like I have been treated any differently because I'm a black woman throughout my pregnancy, throughout the birth experience? The answer to that is absolutely not. I think I've been treated exceptionally well for the most part. And any time where I feel like I've disagreed or challenged the doctor in some way, I don't feel like it's because they're giving me bad advice necessarily. It might be just something that I don't agree with. But again, I don't think that has anything to do with my ethnicity or my race. I have had overall a really good experience of giving birth here in Portugal. Throughout giving birth, the doctors were efficient, they were attentive, and I felt really well treated. They were very careful, they were very friendly, they understood that I might not be fully proficient in some of the medical terms, so they made sure that they found me a doctor who could speak English. I mean, I really couldn't ask for more. During the birth process, they explained everything to me, they respected my birth plan. If I told them that I was in pain, they helped me with that. The aftercare was really good. So I don't think that I was treated any differently to if I'd been a Portuguese woman, to be very honest. So I'm really delighted to say that there wasn't a problem for me. Can I speak for all hospitals and all doctors? Absolutely not. But in my personal experience, I've not had any problems.
You even had the obstetrician's direct email you could contact.
Yes.
And we also have cases of where we have been seen same day as we've requested the appointment.
Yeah.
So I do think we have been receiving excellent service on that account.
Yeah. So there are some things that you will find different from your home country. So one thing that gave me a source of comfort is to look at the NHS guidelines on pregnancy and what was recommended and what tests are done at what points, just to remind myself. It's been sort of 4.5 years since I had my last child, and that actually was in Spain. So it's really useful if you can tap into a resource that you're familiar with from your home country, just to get a sense of the differences and the similarities between each country and what to expect. And the things that were different, I just spoke to my obstetrician and I said, oh, in the UK they do this. Do they do it in Portugal? Or they recommend this in the UK? Do they recommend it in Portugal? And it gave me such a sense of comfort because I had almost a checklist from the UK of the things that of the process and what to expect, and I could use that as a way of gaining knowledge of the Portuguese system. Another thing that's different is that if you want for example, gas and air is not really a thing here. So if you're used to having gas and air wherever you're from, then you might have to get comfortable with an alternative, and that's something that you'd need to discuss with your obstetrician or midwife during the consultation process.
If you, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable about giving birth in Portugal, you have to remember, if you're giving birth in another country that with private healthcare or whatever in that country, then there's a limit on how late you can travel on a plane. Usually it's after 36-37 weeks, then most airline won't allow you to fly, and will require a fit to fly certificate from your doctor. So you just need to bear that in mind in case you are, for whatever reason, not comfortable giving birth in Portugal, or if you prefer giving birth in your home country.
The other thing that's different here is that, for example, in the UK, you have a home visitor after you give birth. So a midwife will come to your home, check the baby's weight, development, make sure that mum's okay, you're breastfeeding okay, all of those things. And it might not be the case for all hospitals, but here what I was advised is that you have to take your baby in to be assessed. So you have to go to the hospital, or you have to go to the Centro da Saúde and have your baby weighed and have all the necessary checks, etc. You're not going to have a home visitor coming to you. So that's one difference. We hope you found the video useful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.
3, 2, 1.